As the ADL, as history moves on, and we're now in the 1920s, let's say, how did the ADL combat Henry Ford and or the KKK?
So first of all, in responding to that, I have to recognize we were very much a fledgling organization in those days. We weren't fully structured. We weren't all across the country as we later came to be. We didn't have all the departments and experts, and so it was fairly new. But right after the Leo Frank case, which was the first case that sort of gave ADL a name because we said things about it, then came Henry Ford. As you remember, Henry Ford, I always talk about that the period before World War II in the 20s and 30s was characterized by very famous Americans engaging in the most blatant form of anti-Semitism. Henry Ford was a great industrial hero, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, and he gets a newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, and he spends all of his time there basically disseminating the infamous protocols of the Learned Elves of Zion, which basically said that Jews control the world for evil purposes. And here, this was in America. You know, it's one thing for it to be in Russia and Europe, but to have this being disseminated by this American hero was. So ADL was, again, somewhat fledgling, so I don't want to overstate, but what we did was we started to produce informational pamphlets, which we distributed to counter the messages that were coming from Ford. Now, again, Ford was a famous American. ADL was a newish organization, so I'm not about to say that we were able to stop Ford from doing it in the 20s, but we published such things, one thing called the Poison Pen, another one called the Protocols, a spurious document, in which we showed that what he's citing is all a bunch of conspiracy theories that have nothing to do with the real world. So it began the process of countervailing this most hateful stuff. But it really it wasn't until actually 1942, when World War II became an American war right after Pearl Harbor, that Ford sent a letter of apology to ADL for his anti-Semitism and saying that it had been a disservice to the country. And I assume part of it was we had become a more serious and well-known organization by that time. But of course, part of it is we now were at war with Nazi Germany. And I think he probably felt the pressures to dissociate himself from the terrible things he did. But there was a lasting impact because he disseminated these most vicious ideas about Jews to a public, many of whom had never heard those things. And then there was a price to be paid for many, many years because of that.
And the KKK in those years?
Okay, really, ADL, I'm more than happy to talk about the KKK because one of the most significant things that ADL ever did involve the KKK, but that actually took place in the early 50s rather than in the 20s. And what happened was, of course, in the early 50s, and we'll talk about this as well, but in the early 50s, of course, there were the early signs of the civil rights movement, and in the South, the KKK was revived again. This was like their third or fourth incarnation. They started terrorizing people all over the South. We already had an office in Atlanta, Georgia, and our office there got the legislature to pass a law known as the anti-mask law. And because we were very much a civil liberties organization, we believe part of ADL's mandate for all these years has been to fight hate and hate speech, but hate speech is constitutionally protected in America. The First Amendment protects even the worst kind of speech. So we were not about to say that the legislature should try to pass something to ban the Klan from demonstrating. Well, we got passed, though, which became important in weakening the Klan, and in ADL's future work, was a bill called the anti-mask law, which said the Klan has a right to demonstrate, as hateful as they are, but they can't, you know, the famous pictures of the Ku Klux Klan with the sheets over their head and carrying the torches, said they can't demonstrate with their faces covered. They have to have their faces open to the public. And that did two terribly important things. One, it weakened the Klan dramatically because it took away the aura of intimidation from that. And suddenly they were your next door neighbors. They weren't these all-powerful people. So it had a real impact on the Klan. For ADL, more significantly, this became the fundamental way that we dealt with issues of hate and extremism for many decades to come, which was not to censor it, but to literally and figuratively expose it to the light of day, and then get good people to stand up against hate. So this became not only an important event in combating the Klan, but it became a very important event for how ADL functioned over many decades.